This is the Round Table, a talk show brought to you by the Glastonbury Goddess Conference. In this circle, the priestesses of the ceremonial circle, the weavers of our annual gathering, talk about pivotal topics about our community, spirituality, and goddess. Join us this year for the 29th Glastonbury Goddess Conference, a joyful gathering of goddess-loving people, a 6 days in-person event in Glastonbury, Avalon, running from Tuesday 30th July to Sunday 4th August 2024, with the fringe events starting from Sunday 28th July. This year the theme is the Goddess of Healing. It's our maiden year, the first year of a new 5-year cycle. International presenters, transformative workshops and experiences, deep ceremonies on the sacred land of Avalon, community, art, fun, and love for Goddess. Let your healing journey begin this year. Join us for the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, Goddess of Healing. There are so many options to participate: full conference tickets, weekend tickets, day tickets. Find what suits you best and get your ticket now at goddessconference.com. Join us this year for the 29th Glastonbury. Good evening, beloved Goddess community, and welcome to the 9th episode, 9 episodes already of the Round Table. Welcome to the wonderful panel we're having here today. So welcome Marion Brigantia.
Hello.
Welcome Caroline Stevens.
Hi.
And welcome Stephanie Allison Schudel.
Hello, everyone.
So Marion, Caroline, and Stephanie are part of the ceremonialist circle of the Glastonbury Goddess Conference. This year in particular, there we go. We are dedicating the year's theme of the conference to healing. Healing is a beautiful word. It's a pivotal part of the goddess community, and in these roundtables we discussed a lot of nuances of healing. We are stepping a bit back from that right now and going back to the roots of our beliefs as goddess community, of the myths and the lore that we inhabit as goddess practitioners, priestesses, healers. So before we start today's topic, we take a look at that, which is spiritual medievalism. What do we mean by that? I have 3 questions to answer today. The first one is, how much of the ancient myths is more a curse than it is a blessing? So in which way do we look at the past mythologies with a fresh eye, and how much of that we can bring to the future with us? Or is there some new knowledge and mythologies we can glom onto the past mythologies to make them survive? How far we've come as a culture, as a civilization? The second one is, are we ready to write new myths, and what is their purpose? Did the purpose change? And the third one, Caroline is already laughing because she's like, this is a lot of stuff to talk about. Yes, it is. Our practice is influenced by the law of the past, and should they instead be facing towards the future? So to start this conversation today, Marion, words to you.
Okay, I think this is a very interesting topic. And you say it's not so much of healing, but for me, it's very much about healing as well. I think because especially in our work, in our teachings, we work a lot with lore, with legends, with myths, because those are the things that have been passed over from the people before us. We say the ancestors, but that's always such a generic term. But yeah, so and I like, that's why I like this topic very much. It's also good to see how these myths and legends were written and with what purpose. And I think like fairy tales and folk tales, myths and legends about the goddesses and the deities of old always have like a teaching or a deeper meaning, or something that people can work with. Because how I see goddess and all deities really, I have looked into this very deeply myself, but you have to realize that the names and the stories and all these things have been written by us humans, and they are written like history. It's very subjective, and there is often a teaching, even sometimes a moralistic teaching that is in there, but also teachings of healing, and that, the stories like folk tales, for instance, have so many layers of learning, of showing people how to do things, how not to do things, what to look out for, where the shadow is, where you have to look after yourself, where you have to work together. All these stories have deeper meaning. When I did a pastoral school years ago, where there was this philosopher, and I still have that very much in mind, and he was talking about what in the Netherlands was called the second language, which is kind of reading between the lines. It is really like, so you read the story and you can read the story on face value, or you can look at the deeper meaning. And I think this is very much how goddess myths and legends are written. And I find it very interesting to look at that. And in my teachings for 𝙁, there's an enormous source of myth and legends, because they have all been saved and written down about Saint Bridget. But that's a bit different than the goddess teaching. So that you also have to look at how to take away the Christian layer of that and dive deeper into the older traditions. But you have the I can never say that, Mabibikon.
Yeah.
And the Camina Gedalica, and there's so many old Celtic writings. But of course, in all the goddess traditions, all the Mediterranean goddess traditions, I know Katinka works with that very deeply, but also with all the traditions like the European traditions, it is often from the folk stories and from the myths and legends that you can actually bring back goddess. Remember her name, remember her traditions, remember how the people called her, and the healing, I would say, the teachings, the healing that she brought to the people. So that's my intro.
I would love to bring in the words of another ceremonialist who's not here today, and we say hi to her, Annabelle. And she specifically says peeling away layers of patriarchy. I think it's widely, it's a concept that we widely use as a community. But it's that as well, indeed. So it's going to the roots of why that story was woven in the first place, and finding those roots, peeling away everything else that was a social construct for the time when that myth was firstly recounted or woven in by people, because there are many layers, of course, to that. And you particularly, Marion, are working with Brigid, which is very ancient and very present in many lands. I mean, she is very all over Europe, really, with many different names and many different nuances. So how do you reconstruct such deep roots, and how do you peel off everything else that was a social construct maybe, and that can detract from her lesson, her message?
I think that if I could just say, I think the one thing to remember is the stories that we have now come from much, much older stories anyway. They were from an oral tradition. So we're working, so many, as Marion said, I completely agree with that. There are already so many layers to the myths and the folklore, but there are potentially even more layers that have been lost in translation, if you like, from the bardic storytelling when it was just a purely oral tradition, then written down into a language. I can't read ancient Welsh, for example, or Edda in original Old Norse or anything like that. So straight away it's lost. You're losing something in the translation from modern English to medieval English from those ancient bardic tales anyway. So it's, there's so many potential layers that have been lost, and yet so much has been retained. It's like a life's work for some people, isn't it, to try to, it really, really is. And that's what Marianne says, I think, is about that healing aspect as well. It's a healing journey in itself to extract and to look through those layers and through the symbolism for what is behind. And it is always going to be subjective with stories and myths. There will always be a level of personal interpretation, I think. It's yes. I saw a little comment come up. It is. What was that lovely comment? It's a deep. It's
a whirlpool.
Definitely is a whirlpool.
It is. And also, Caroline, how dare you not be able to read ancient Welsh?
Well, I actually took Anglo-Saxon study, and at one point I could read Anglo-Saxon. So I did read Anglo-Saxon, like Beowulf. I was translating. I had to go at translating Beowulf myself, and that was when I actually had first-hand realization of just how much could be lost in translation. And when I was trying to unpick it myself, it was really interesting to do. So that's, and then I think knowing that the bardic tales of the Celtic ancestors would have been purely oral tradition. So there would have been so many layers, individual to each bard. The myths of Bridget would have been, the core myth of say of the beer or something would have been so different to each of the bards that would have told that tale, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
it's great stuff.
Also, I think Caroline, and I think in this topic particularly, me and Stephanie can resonate a bit more, because Marion and Caroline, you're working with mythology and lore that is still alive. What I read about, the English lore, the Arthurian legends as well, is that they are still alive. They're still evolving. So let's say the latest centuries of mythology of Arthur, let's say, they still advance, that mythology. While I suppose that me and Stephanie are more used to a mythology that's like, there was in the past, then was like a bit forgotten, and now we are like, taking it out, and people are like, who? Like Verena, who's that? So how do you venture? Because it's a bit different. Bridget is still, it's still really alive in tradition as well. In Ireland and in the UK as well. But I think, Stephanie, you had to dig a little bit deeper to retrieve Verena, didn't you?
Yeah. It's so interesting, because I just literally had this. I was on this journey this week. I was asked last year from a teacher at a university who also works for the church here in Switzerland, because they want to modernize the church here in Switzerland. So they're constantly looking for people and other ways of thinking and other religions, and so they have these. So they get together with people from other countries, and then they go and visit these people and listen to what they have to say. And I was one that was asked, and they came. Actually, that was last week. They came. So there were nine people, 2 women and 7 men that came from the church. Very, and they wanted to hear about goddess and it was really interesting. And this whole thing came up with but I heard Verena, she was actually a saint. She was not a goddess. And I was just sitting there like, okay, all right, this is gonna be fun, yay! and I was just sitting there, and they were like, all these Venuses that were found, these could also just be dollies. How do we know that these are really goddesses? How do we know that goddesses really exist? And I'm like, oh, yay. And for them, it was what is scientifically proven and what is actually myth and lore and written by people. So this whole discussion started. It was extremely interesting. And it was fantastic in the end. But it was really, it was not easy, because because like Annabelle said, it's peeling back the layers of patriarchy. And in the end, I mean, we were supposed to only talk for an hour, but we were there for 2.5 hours because it was just so interesting. And, you know, I caught them off guard every time. It was really great. And because Verena, the healer goddess of our country, I mean, she's in the land. She has so many different places in Switzerland that is dedicated to her, but she was still made a saint, like a lot of goddesses, like Bridget and a lot of goddesses. And for me, really finding the goddesses here in Switzerland is to feel their energy, because there's so much written that hasn't changed, and I'm just started to really go with what I feel and how my connection is with her. And I do that with all kinds of goddesses. I've been doing lots of research around all kinds of different Swiss goddesses, and there is some myth and lore, but not that much like in other countries. So for me, it's really tuning into the land and absolutely okay with also creating new. I mean, because all the myth and lore was written by people, you know, why don't we create new? And they're constantly connected with us and give us information. But it is, I've been noticing that peeling back the patriarch, you know, the layers of patriarchy, and just being open to also different kinds of views and what we can learn out of it.
Yeah, I think it's like, it's quite a complex but a multifaceted actually it's a whole study really, and I'm really happy to see that at the moment there's quite a lot of academia is coming into and is interested in the goddess tradition. And I last month I had about 3 or 4 interviews with people who are doing PhDs about you know, about goddess and the ways of goddess in the modern time, and of course the link to the old time. And I think it is because a lot of the things that you do is also, like you say, you look at the land, you feel in to your own practices, but also you study. It's almost like a separate part of archaeology. And I like from the BBC, Neil Oliver. He went into, I'm a big fan of Neil Oliver, and because he looked at the spiritual side of archaeology, and went to the people who are doing the practices. So for us as priestesses and priests of goddess, we go to places. So I'm talking about places now, but it's the same with stories.
Yeah.
We go to places, and I'm going to say an Iron Age or a Stone Age settlement, and I'm going to see, okay, if I was the priestess here, or the shaman or shamanka, whatever it was called, you know, what would be the practices? And the same thing is with stories. And we just had, with the Bridget clan, we just had this whole exercise really, where we looked at the Christian stories of Bridget, and then we, you know, looked at the archaeology, how were things in those times, when were they written, when were the stories written, who wrote them, what was their intention for the story, what is our own priestess practice with Bridget, how can we weave all that together and make new stories, like you say, Stephanie. And I think making new myths, you know, it's not about trying to say, oh, this is now the truth, you know. This is for me, that's never the case. It's more like, okay, so how are we experiencing these things? Like, how are you, the stories of Verena, for instance, in Switzerland, how are you experiencing that? How do we work with goddesses like Aphrodite or Bridget or Coventina, or all the goddesses that we work with? And I think this is what we do in the Goddess Conference, is really go from the experience, and how do we experience it, and how do they speak to us. And we've been writing these new myths over the last 5 years. We have written new myths really based on how we experience these goddesses. And then of course there's always an influence from the old stories, because that's also it's an incredible, valuable source of information. But I think, like things like the Bible and things, don't take it literally, see it how it is, and see and what is the intention of the story, and then, how does that speak to us? How does that work in our practice as priestess? How do we give form and ritual and ceremony to that? And how does it inform us? What does it bring? What does it bring to us? So yeah, I'm very passionate about this story, and like I said, we've been writing. Can I just show them as well?
Yes, you do.
We've been writing these stories the last 5 years about the moon maidens, the sun lover, earth mother. Where is she? Star queen somewhere here, and last year the 𝘠𝗟𝗏𝗏. And it's very, on one hand, it's very challenging because you are working with myth and legend that's already existent and has been there for maybe thousands of years, and people have kind of adopted that as a truth, that this is the story of Rhiannon, this is the story of Coventina, this is and actually she needs to move forward to the future, because she needs to come with us into the future, and how we are now, and how she informs us now, and how she brings her healing now. So I'm very passionate about this.
Could you show the books again, Marion, please? So please okay. Those are fantastic books that you can all find on goddessconference.com/shops. So they are collections of the stories that the ceremonialists of the ceremonialist circle wrote in the past years of the Goddess Conference. They are really magic and stories and mythology and lore in a nutshell, a beautiful nutshells of books. So please do get to goddessconference.com/shop. And before we continue with our topic, we have a special little break.
Welcome to the Goddess Web. We are so excited to tell you about this new amazing streaming platform that we are launching. An amazing place for goddess wisdom and voices internationally, presentations and offerings that will be by subscription. This amazing new experience is a unique creation that will bring you the Goddess Conference, the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, in your home. It is going to be a development that we are working on every year. So, for example, this year subscribers will receive an experience of the Goddess of Healing Conference that will give you access all year round to these extraordinary wisdom keepers who will be presenting specially designed contexts that you can't find anywhere else, not even if you come to us in the in-person conference. So please come and check us out. The Goddess Web is open from today for subscriptions, and we so look forward to sharing this amazing platform, this online experience from the heart of the Glastonbury Goddess Conference with you all.
So if you're not planning on coming to Glastonbury this summer, please do join us at the goddessweb.com. This is if you're joining us from a podcast or from YouTube or from Facebook Live, you're possibly one of those people who follow us but cannot make it to the UK. So if you want to have an online experience of the Goddess Conference, the Glastonbury Goddess Conference, please do join us at thegoddessweb.com. The content will be available starting the 1st of August until next year. So you will have plenty of time to look at this content and meditate on it at your own pace, and there will be exclusive content like those stories that we just mentioned that are available at goddessconference.com/shop. Please do enjoy those offerings that we bring you. And sorry for the commercial break, but
because it's very professional, we have a commercial break.
Also, hi to Katinka, who sends us big warm hugs from. She's not here with us today.
Great.
From Greece with Angie, isn't she? With Angie, Right?
No,
And Amanda.
Mona and Amanda.
It's another one. Tori says, I will never get their schedule right. Anyway, for a topic, Marion, you were talking about weaving stories. What is really interesting to me is that aside from the myths and lore that we've woven at the Goddess Conference, you also did a magnificent job with Bridget. Could you tell us?
Yeah, so this is what we've done. I'm going to show it as well. This is the prototype. It's going to be published for the conference, which is we have unraveled. So we have actually, it's called Bridget Unraveled.
For the people on the podcast, she's shown a book.
I'm showing a book cover, which is.
Have a round of applause because we're very proud of our Marion for doing this.
Yay! Finally. So yeah, it's been really lovely. It's actually we've come together over the winter online with the Bridget clan, and so we have unraveled like you would unravel a weaving, and then looked at different aspects of the stories. Looked at the Christianization, the moralistic stories, the patriarchal part of it. And then kind of taken those aspects out and rewoven them in a different way. So the 9 stories about Bridget, which are most common to us, the story of the cloak, the story of the Lake of Beer, the making of the Bridget cross, those stories, and 6 other stories. We have kind of looked at it. An interesting thing is that what we found is that there are definitely like historical. It was exactly who wrote it and when they wrote it, and you can even see there. You have the 9th century, you have the 12th century, and it became more and more Christian the further you become into the medieval times. And so it's interesting to see how that even in Christianity has developed and the stories have changed. So, it's not about saying, oh, those stories are not very good or whatever. People have always had very much, use for it, and they help them with their living. But there's also time to put them in a more, I say a more modern context, but actually it's even a more ancient context. It's actually going back, like Caroline said, to that bardic lore, to the Celtic lore, which was before Christianity. So and the thing with Bridget is very clear because you have the Christianity, but if you have, like Caroline said before, even in the bardic lore, or stories like became like romance, more romanticized, like you said, Andrea, the Arthur stories. When I'm doing tours here on the land, people come here with the idea that King Arthur lived in a like medieval or Normandic castle, and they had knights in shining armor, and that's not when King Arthur lived. That's not real. It's not real in the in the historical context. So it is really, I think, as I said before, it is good to also look at your archaeology and to dive into that historical context of the myth and legends. And a lot you can also see when patriarchal distortion came in more strongly, because the earlier stories don't have that so much. So it's fascinating to really look at those stories, but I think always it's good to not just take any stories and myth and legend as truth, but to really try to feel into, and in the combination with your own practices, in combination with what you said, Stephanie, with the land, to put them in a context that is that is more goddess based. And I just want to say one thing that I came across myself, which I actually, and that's great because I did it with a group, is that the whole, for instance, that's an interesting thing. For instance, that the maiden mother crone archetypes of the goddess tradition, which is now very ingrained in our thinking and in our experiencing of goddess. It's actually written down by, I think it's called Graves, but the White Goddess, Robert Graves, I think. So he was the first one who brought that up. And there's also, like, you know, names that also are very normal, like Mabon and Lammas. Those are also from last century. They were not ancient terms. So it's really good to look into your history and into your archaeology, even from the goddess tradition, you know, and see what is real or what is more. I don't know. So I don't need to be 100% historically correct, but what feels right and what is, you know, into the message of love and healing. I think what goddess is about.
I think for me, the stories, kind of going back to last year's conference, they're almost like a portal, aren't they? They're a way in. So to read them not as gospel truth, you know, like you say, Marion, not kind of like, well, this is just how it is then. So this is fact. That it's a way in. It's a beautiful portal into your own experience. So kind of reading that, and then you say looking at your own practices, being out on the land and your own experiences, and then weaving, as you say, Marion, weaving those things all together and finding your own truth and your own experience of whichever goddess it is you're working with, whichever archetype it is. I think they're very much a beautiful tool for that purpose, and I think they are still really. I think one of the questions is, what are their purpose? And for me, that is one of the purposes. It's that kind of portal in, and that way of sparking my own creativity and my own curiosity about that goddess or that story, and what does it mean for me personally. Yeah.
And you always read exactly what you need. That's the really interesting thing, because it can be that somebody reads the same story but sees something completely different in it. That something comes out that you just have to hear for the journey that you're on. That's the beautiful thing about all these stories.
Revisiting it, you might find something different is pertinent, say 3 years on for yourself. Yeah, very much so.
Well, first, Carolyn, let me address the fact that you mentioned the gospel truth from Hercules, which I really love. I don't know if that was your reference, but to me, it was the 5 muses from Hercules from Disney. So thank you very much. That was my first approach to goddess as a child. The gospel truth was the song, the gospel truth from Hercules was goddess was to me for a long time. So thank you for bringing that. But what you say is particularly, I think, insightful, because it brings us back to the topic in an unexpected turn of events, and in a way that I was not expecting it to turn. So we are saying that the way we connect to the land, the way we live those stories, and the way we can find our own message in those stories, they kind of create a new mythology, a new lore, because the way you experience Brigid, in a way, for instance, let's pick Brigid, creates a new mythology and lore that was non-existing before. And the way you bring that forward into the future is a new vision of her. But it's not unrelated, because it connects to land, to traditions, to maybe ceremonies that were brought from the past. And this is an answer to today's topic. And I want to get tricky on that. So is there something, because otherwise we get too kind, and recently we've been really kind at this round table. So, but I want to still be kind, but I want to be a bit more tricky here. So is there anything from the lore, from the mythologies that you encounter as priestesses, as healers, that is more a cause than it is a blessing? There must be something when thinking about, the goddesses you work with, that you're like, okay, does this really need to be part of our mythology? Can't I just pretend it did not exist? And how do we deal with that? Because most of the times it's not part of the mythology and lore itself, but it's part of how the society run at the time the myth was created. But is there anything about your goddesses of your heart that you find unsettling, or that you feel is more a curse than it is a blessing?
I think for when I think about Verena, is what she was made into. is actually completely the opposite of how I feel her. So she was made into a saint. It was said that she was a big healer, and she was the bringers of wonders. And yes, that all belongs to her. So she has a lot of sacred spaces here in Switzerland, and she was worshipped all the way up, and also in Italy. You probably also heard of Verena, and what they made out of her. And I think there's this one part in her creek. So there's the big Verena Schlucht in Switzerland. It's a beautiful creek, and it was said that she lived there in a cave, and that she would make this beautiful weaving art, and that there was a old lady that would sell it at the markets, etc. And in that story of the Verena Creek, it was said that that the devil threw a big stone at Verena to get her out of the creek. And what's really interesting is how I feel it is because in all of Verena's stories, there's always her masculine counterpart. So there's never a mother. It's always the father that wants to marry her off or put her, sell her off or whatever to get more money, to get the bigger, the more land and. But she always had a masculine counterpart that loved her to bits. That was always here. If it was, and he had different roles. So when we started to work here with Verena, we really stepped away from the devil, the masculine who wanted to get her out or of the creek, but he actually wanted to come in. And when we created Verena's temple, it was like it was not finished until we had the masculine with her, because in all of her lore and all her mythology, there was the masculine with her and they were a team. They were always a team, which was really beautiful. And the energy has changed since we brought them together. So it's also the people that walk into her temple kind of being able to heal those places with the masculine, so the women could heal the places with the masculine and vice versa. But I think is what they've made of her, of this woman who was so ashamed that she wanted to live, and she locked herself into a cave, and she didn't want to, until she died, and all these things. She just wanted to spend her life in prayer, and so that's what the monks made out of her.
Yeah.
And really also cutting off the power of the masculine, about, making them fight with each other instead of how it actually is of them being, really flowing into each other and being very powerful with each other. It's like the stories kind of wanted to separate them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of that. And a lot of people in Switzerland know Verena through those stories of the saint, of those things, instead of actually the energy that she has and the stories from before, and the songs. She has a lot of songs where actually that love with the masculine is here. It's in the folk songs, but it's the church that kind of yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think you can say they are the curse, because I find I actually find if you know how to translate things, there's a Dutch lady, Anine van der Meer. She came to the Goddess Conference a couple of years, I think it was in 2019 or 18. She wrote this whole book about, and it looks like Verena is the same as Bridget, that they made her into a Christian saint. And but she has taught. She wrote a lot about how to it's not debunking actually, but how to retranslate those things. And again, so I don't think it's a curse. For me, it's more like if something like that, like a devil, or in the story of Mary Magdalene, I do that in tours here in Glastonbury, is that she's in the St. Patrick's Chapel. She's depicted with all these demons around her, And also, the story of St. Patrick with the snakes. So if you know the symbolism, like devil, demon, snake, dragon, if those things are in the Christian myth and legend, you can just say, there will be a goddess story underneath. Because that's the goddess is often, even in the time of Apollo, fighting with the great snake, that was Gaia. I mean, that's, so it's the Christian and the patriarchy, even before Christianity has really made goddess into these negative things. But actually, I don't see it as a curse. It might have been a curse over a lot of but at the moment, with all the knowledge that we have now, is actually like say, oh, okay, I can see a dragon there, or oh, they're talking about snakes, or oh, there's a demon. I'm like, okay, so my antennas go out like, okay, what's the goddess story? I get really excited. So what is the goddess story? And then I go research and see what is the goddess story underneath. So for me, it's not a curse, it's an indicator. It's like, okay, so how can we? So these stories, they need to be looked at, and I like that.
Like a gateway again.
And also, I think what has happened that over a long time with Christianity and patriarchy has been that, yes, it has been used to especially demonize women and to suppress women and everybody who is not a man, really, and different. But at the moment, actually, with all the knowledge that we have here in the Western world, I'm not saying everywhere in the world, but here in England, in Europe, we have now the power to say, okay, that's enough. We're going to look at these stories and we're going to make them to move forward, to move to the future, and to really bring in the healing and bring in the love which goddess is.
It has much to do also with the way story was transcribed in a way, because if we look at Morgana as well, in the first tales of Morgana, she's a wise woman who heals people. She has wonderful powers. By the time stories needed to be translated and written down by Christianity in a way, there were only like 3 definitions of what something magical could look like. So there were the miraculosus, sorry, it's Latin and I don't do Latin, sorry, but it's like miracles. They were okay. Miracles were okay, but they were, of course, only for saints and ta-da. And then there was this, everything else went to evil and demonic, and so that's where Morgana stopped being a goddess, or a goddess from an island, or a powerful being, and became a woman, and an evil woman. And that's one of the indicators you were talking about. When you see dragons, when you see evil people living on an island and trying to curse it, that's an indicator that something was there. And what amazes me is that there was something existing in between, which was the fairy lore of Ireland, which survived the purge in a way, and but everything that was so powerful was diminished as tiny little creatures that would fly around. So they were, anyway, even gods were diminished to entities that could be, they were spiteful and disturbing the human beings, like good Christians. So it's very interesting the way we have indicators, but I wanted to dig a bit deeper in that. Is you mentioned the maiden mother crone. We mentioned many times, we got the queen archetype in it. We have the the crone. So we kind of expanded that. Is there? And when we look at as Stephanie, the Venuses that were found, and people, the Venuses, and we're like, no, they're goddesses, but it takes a bit of time to reconstruct that. Is there any moment where you feel that those maiden mother crone is limiting to you, where you feel like it's as an example, I mean, is it limiting in your view of the goddess? Because, for instance, to me, I mean, I'm biologically a man, and to me that sounds sometimes a bit like a limitation, because you see there's so many other forms that she could have. And it's not a she because she's specifically a maiden or specifically an old woman in a cave, but she's mother. She's mother in a very wide sense. So is there anything that feels like you're bringing, you know, into the future, but it comes from the older lore that you struggle with a bit, that you feel it's, you know, it's a bit like a constraint for you?
That was one of the subjects that I had with the people from the church. is when I said that goddess or mother, father, God, or however is in everything. I don't limit her into just, you know, one figure. I mean, she has so many names. She has so many ways that she shows and presents herself. And she shows herself, I think, exactly of how we need her to show up. Yeah. You know, for us in that moment, maybe it's not always what we want, but what we need. But that was what I was trying to tell them, is for me, the creation, the creatrix is absolutely in everything, in every person, in every breath, in every stone, in every leaf, and in absolutely everything. That was how I see her. So for me, I think it's because she's so big, I don't limit her. I think, yeah. Mm-hmm. It's really interesting to have that topic with them, because they never saw it that way.
Mm.
Mm. And for them,
I think with the maiden mother crone, it's going back to what Marion said, as a trinity, as a trinity of goddess. That trinity is very, very relatively recent, isn't it? It is relatively recent, and I think myself personally, I do not limit her to that trinity. At the conference, we have already, you know, there's been a 5-year cycle of different of 5 archetypes, and again, that's just 5. There are many, many more archetypes, but in one way, by putting goddess into breaking her into archetypes, I feel that there is a limitation there. Straight away, it is a humanization of energies, really. I personally prefer to work with energies. So rather than say the maiden, I prefer to think of rising energy. So rather than a box of the maiden, I prefer to think of the energy as rising. So thinking like it's springtime, it's the sap rising in the trees and things like that. So that's how I personally, in my own practice, that's how I work. You like that?
Yes.
I think it's what I notice as a teacher is that, you know, it's a really good tool. And I think you have to really realize that what you're doing, it's a tool. It's not the truth. It's not dogmatic. We're not dogmatic in the goddess tradition. So it's like it's when I teach in the first year, it is quite like strongly like, oh, this is maiden, this is lover, this is mother. But then, you know, when you go further in the studies, you know, to be a priestess, you know, that opens up. And actually, like you said, Caroline, it's like you work more with the energy, you work more with specific things. But it is a way of relating. I think it is a way of relating as human beings. Yeah, this is always the case with goddess. We as human beings need some kind of form of definition or.
Think of the alphabet. They're just letters, aren't they? And then it's a combination of letters make words. You have to start somewhere, and they are, you know, the archetypes are a beautiful tool and a lovely, again, portal. It's that entry point into what is really a mystery tradition.
Yes, definitely.
It takes time to immerse into goddess and working towards being a priestess. And I think, Steph, it was possibly the first one of these where you yourself said, you know, you can do as many trainings as we may want to do as an individual, but it's goddess that will gift you the title of priestess one day through immersion and experiences, isn't it? It definitely is that. So yes. They're an amazing tool. to archetypally to work with, but it is a tool into a mystery tradition. And again, that's where those myths come in as another tool, aren't they? Definitely.
Yes. And I think it's in the aspects of the archetypes, especially, is that, you know, like we say, it's the one and the many of all the goddesses, but also it's the one of the many of all the different aspects. So if you work with the wheel of, say, Bridget, then you have all these aspects, the archetypes and the elementals, but in the end, it is the center and she is the mystery. Yeah. And so totally agree.
And last question, though, if we write new myths, like Marion, Carolyn, you both do, and you both work in this way. So aside, you know, from the myth itself, and from the lore that you might want to create, there is a substantial difference from the past. So they had mythologies and laws were created to influence or to address society, cultural behaviors. What do you feel is the purpose today to create the new myths you are co-creating, co-writing, fostering, supporting? What are the new purposes to create mythologies now in 2024?
I think for me, it's very much to give an experience of goddess. And like what Caroline said so beautifully, is about a portal. So these new myths can be a portal for people to relate to goddess, and to feel her in the modern time and how she speaks to us as ceremonialists in the modern time. And maybe people relate to it, or maybe they don't. And this has to be this way. So it's really an offering for us to have relationship with goddess.
And it's also a resource for future generations and future path walkers of this way, isn't it? It's if I think from when I first encountered goddess, so there's so much more. I mean, there was the internet, but not much, you know. Now there's so many more resources for people to be able to tap into. So to be able to add new myths and vulnerabilities and curiosities, and to encourage people to not take something as truth. And I think, Marion, your book, calling it Bridget Unraveled, is beautiful, because I've got this vision of this amazing blanket that, you know, that the bards had wrapped around, or a shawl that they had wrapped around their shoulders, that's got all of that history in, and then unpicking that, but still using that wool to knit a new shawl or a jumper or something that you can wear when you're out on the land now. So it's up to, you know, you can wear it with your wellies and with your Gore-Tex jacket over the top of it, but it's still there and it's still got the heritage. And I think, for me, that's such an amazing image. That's what you've done. You've taken that, maybe that medieval, that Christian, those Christian myths, you've unraveled them, but you're reworking that exact same wool, aren't you? And into something.
And it fits really beautifully in our theme from the conference, because in the next 5 years, we are very much working with the golden thread and the weaving and the reweaving. And so, thank you.
Stephanie, we were just the last question, you know, how are those new mythologies and laws we're weaving now in 2024? What is their purpose? I mean, in the past, the purpose was to address society, to inform the youngsters on how to behave while growing up, much like fairy tales, or to, address also, you know, for the grown-ups, how to behave, how to work as a society, and what to believe as well. What do you think is the purpose of today's mythologies and laws?
So sorry, my internet just broke down. I'm so sorry about that. So it's like, oops. Oh, gosh. I think that we are in a place where we can be more open to new mythologies, you know, not like not set in the old ways. And I think they're very, very important. And I think even more should be written, because it's like we've left the battlefield of the old. We're not quite in the new yet. And I think on that bridge, I think these new mythologies are very important to find our way into the new. And I think even more should be written. And I think we should think about more of what kind of world do we want to live in, and maybe write some new stories about that, you know?
That's a very good line. That's a very good line, Stephanie Allison. That cues me to wrap up this fantastic roundtable. And I would love to remind all the people following us on YouTube, Facebook, and on the podcast to please visit goddessconference.com/shop to get the Goddess Myth books that were written and are still being written in our Goddess Conference events. Please do join us on the Goddess Web if you cannot make it to the Goddess Conference in person this year in Glastonbury. And also, if you are willing to join us, please visit goddessconference.com/shop to get your ticket for the Glastonbury Goddess Conference Maiden Year Goddess of Healing. I would love to thank our panel today. Carolyn Stevens, thank you, darling.
Bye.
Thank you, Stephanie Allison 𝙬𝗎𝙬𝗎.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Marion Brigantia.
Thank you very much.
And congrats for your fantastic book, Bring It Unravel, coming out so very soon, and we'll get it at the Glastonbury Goddess Conference. Are we getting it as well online?
Probably.
Probably. So we'll see about that. But please check out Marion Brigantia on Facebook and on your social media so you can keep up with the news about an upcoming book that we're all waiting for.
So signed copy.
And also there will be an anthology as well from the Goddess Conference about Goddess of Healing this year.
Yeah. So it adds up to the Goddess Myth books that we already have on the website. So it's going to be another fantastic book from this year's Glastonbury Goddess Conference. Thank you, everybody, and see you next week here at the Roundtable.
Thank you.
This is the Roundtable, a talk show brought to you by the Glastonbury Goddess Conference. In this circle, the priestesses of the ceremonial circle, the weavers of our annual gathering, talk about pivotal topics about our community, spirituality,